Good morning. My name's Ian Atkinson. I'm a partner in the Womble Bond Dickinson construction team and the MMC subsector lead at WBD. Thank you for joining us for what promises to be a really interesting discussion about the progress of modern methods of construction to date and some of the challenges that we have yet still to overcome. Before I go any further, can I just make a couple of points on housekeeping? We'll be recording this session to share with you all so that you can either pass that on to your colleagues or rewatch. We do welcome questions and we'll be answering them at the end of the session. To submit your questions, please use the Q&A panel that should be visible on the right-hand side of your screen. If you can't see it, if you click on the panel options using the three dots in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and all questions will be kept anonymous. My interest in MMC was prompted back in, well, the time of the autumn budget back in 2017, when the government committed to drive the adoption of modern methods of construction by saying it wanted all suitable capital programs to use off-site construction, which is obviously just one facet of MMC, by 2019, provided that it represented the best value for money. And since then, we've been advising central government, local authorities, developers and contractors on the legal issues associated with MMC and helping to come up with some solutions to encourage its successful adoption. So with well-documented challenges in the construction industry, highlighted, of course, over the last couple of years by material and labour shortages, the rate of MMC has been accelerating. That's a good thing for us, and the interest in MMC has been growing really quite rapidly. And now with the government's requirement that strategic partnerships under the Affordable Homes Programme must deliver at least 25% of their homes using MMC, we're starting to get some real momentum. And I think we are on the cusp of some major innovative change in the construction industry. But of course, the learning curve is going to be a steep one. So I'm joined today by a panel of industry experts for what I'm sure will be a lively chat discussing some of the key challenges and benefits of MMC. Our discussion should last approximately 45-50 minutes. We'll have about 10 minutes at the end for questions. So if I could ask each of the panel members to introduce themselves, if I start with you, Edward, please.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Ian. My name is Edward Joseph. I'm a senior manager at the Investment Directorate within Homes England, the government's housing agency. I'm a chartered surveyor with an equity investment background. I joined Homes England in 2017, where I worked on a number of financing projects, development finance and infrastructure finance, that happened to include some MMC with some early market adopters. And as a result, I became somewhat of the MMC go-to person in the agency. And as a result of that, I'm now on a joint team with the Housing Department, DLUC, where they have the policy responsibility for all the things they're looking to achieve with MMC: sustainability, quality, safety, design, speed of delivery, and meeting government housing objectives. This is where I work, connecting that national policy into Homes England's activity on the ground. And the example that Ian's just giving of embedding MMC in our affordable housing programme is one example of the type of work that I do. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. Jessie, good morning.
Morning. So my name is Jessie Wilde and I'm one of the directors of the Bristol Housing Festival. So we work really closely with Bristol City Council and with the West of England Combined Authority, looking at how you bring innovative housing solutions forward. And our focus has been very much on modern methods of construction. So working with local authorities, with housing associations to look at really overcoming the barriers to entry for MMC. So we're not a developer, we're not building the homes or anything like that, but we're working to kind of unpick some of the issues that prevent MMC being used and act as an enabler really for a local authority and local companies to enable them to get over those barriers.
Thank you, Jessie. If I pass over to Joe. Morning, Joe.
Thanks, Ian. Morning. So I'm Joe Walland. I'm a relationship manager at Wilde. In my day-to-day role, I work with large corporate house builders, and I also bank MMC companies and have a general interest in MMC more broadly.
Thank you, Joe. I pass now to you, Pablo.
Good morning. So I'm Pablo Martinez, senior lecturer at Northumbria University these days. And for the past 5 years, I've been consulting with construction companies, especially in North America, to help them transition to more MMC way of working instead of the traditional way of doing that.
Thank you, Pablo. And finally, to you, Stephen. Good morning.
Good morning, Ian. Thank you very much. Stephen Whiteman, I'm the UK MMC lead for Faithful and Gould. Only recently joined the consultancy side, having spent 20 odd years in the actual manufacturing businesses on the MMC side. And I think where we see our role in this is to try and provide the link between the clients who want to uptake MMC, the design teams and the contractors and even the supply chain that's doing it, because we get involved in early REBA stages. So what we have a chance to do is to actually help the client develop their process and their strategies and determine what's going to be best for them to do, because MMC is not a one-size-fits-all process. So from our perspective, that's how we work in that sort of relationship space. So REBA 0 through sort of stages 4 in the pre-construction stages to try and assist the uptake of MMC in the marketplace and make sure what comes out is MMC compatible for the right format.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone. So let's start our discussion today with the theme of standardisation. So as I alluded to in the introduction, that the government's determined to make the shift to modern methods of construction happen. It wants, and I'm sure we all want, a more flexible, a more sustainable, and of course a more consistent construction industry. But there, of course, are some remaining concerns from consumers, from mortgage providers and insurers about its adoption, chief among them the lack of standards to which MMC must be graded and assessed. Now, NHBC does offer the NHBC Accept accreditation, but that only applies to a small number of already available products and systems. I'm also aware the BSI is currently looking at off-site construction and updating their standards, but that's going to take some time. So I'd like to ask the panel, do you think the current lack of technical standards is a barrier to the increased adoption of MMC? And is standardization absolutely necessary? And can I start with you, Pablo, on that one, please?
Sure. So I think the main point here is if we look at what's happening in the world outside the UK, the industry is actually pushing for those standards. And if we see what's been happening for the past years, even very recently in Canada, a new standard just showed up for offsite construction that is supposed to be able to help the construction to be more risk averse, to help grow in that sense. But it's still too early to say, well, has it been beneficial for the industry? It's too early yet. Whatever the standard could be, it's also a very double-edged sword in that case. In one side, you help the industry to grow, and on the other side, one of the concerns that people have is that, well, will it suppress innovation? How we will lose that trend of innovation that has been inspiring the construction industry in this sense with the MMC towards a more novel, you could say, method of construction. And that's one of the concerns that standards may suppress in that sense, is that we don't want to risk having those factories or having those companies find solutions that are completely innovative to a certain problem because they think that standards have already covered that solution already. So in that sense, will it benefit the industry? Possibly, yes, to grow. But we have to be really careful about who's writing the standards, who is involved in those standards, to make sure that it does not actually hinder the growth and the evolution of the construction industry forward.
Jessie, what about you? Where do you think those standards might come from then?
I think the standards is talking about standards when it comes to modern methods of construction is kind of part of the deal, because if you look at there's an element of standardization, which actually is the benefit of modern methods of construction. Particularly, you look at volumetric builds, standardization and standardized component parts and standardized whole units is some of the benefit you get from MMC. But I think when you're looking specifically at standards as opposed to standardization, I would suggest you need to be developing those with the supply chain, with those manufacturers, with those providers of MMC products, particularly kind of all scales and all sizes, of all types of MMC as well. I think there's a real danger we could end up as an industry imposing standards, or as a client base thinking of local authorities or housing associations wanting to make sure that it sits and it fits with their kind of wants, desires, models, etc. And actually the industry is developing. It's in a process of development, and so we need to make sure that as we're developing standards to hold it to account, to make sure that it is doing what it says it's going to do, that those standards are being developed with the companies that are going to have to adhere to them, to make sure that they're the most suitable and that they do the job they're supposed to do.
And Stephen, what's your view? I know we've talked in the past, and you see the benefits of MMC is so much wider than just speed of delivery and the like. Standardization for you, a good thing or a bad thing?
I think perhaps standardizing sort of components or details or those kind of things, I don't think is necessarily the answer. For me, I think the key here is to actually look at the performance criteria, because if you don't want to stifle the marketplace, to pick up Pablo's point, if you provide requirements of performance that is going to actually deliver outcomes for users, because key amongst this is actually, what are we trying to do? We're trying to improve outcomes for users. We're trying to deliver more houses and better houses faster, with higher levels of quality that have, fewer people in fuel poverty, etc. So for me, if you look at it, there are a number of things that MMC gives you for free. They're not currently part of the sort of the profile. They actually come as a consequence of what you're doing. So if you look at volumetric construction as an example, acoustic attenuation in a volumetric construction between floors is significantly better than in a traditional build, because there are two elements that are isolated. There's a floor and a ceiling. So you get acoustic attenuation between room spaces, which is far in excess of what's achievable in a traditional single element construction. Now, if the performance standards required that acoustic attenuation was a part of the performance criteria, the traditional builders would have to add in content and increase the performance of their buildings and close the gap between what is already provided free of charge by MMC. So I think for me, it's around actually setting standards around performance, because then you allow the industry to innovate. That's what's happened in other industries, like the car industry. What happened? You set emission standards, everyone starts innovating and providing more efficient engines. So do you actually let the industry innovate, but try and set a more level playing field and actually look at where the things that MMC does for free, like speed, like quality, like performance of the fabric, the building fabric. Most MMC buildings will achieve air tightness levels below 2, when the standard is 10. So it's 5 times better than industry standards, and things like passive house. So for me, it's about standards. I think it's setting those performance standards rather than necessarily actually standardizing robust standard details, because that way you stifle innovation. Performance standards actually encourages everyone to deliver what they should be delivering, which is high quality performing buildings.
Edward, what's your view on this, please?
So it's incredibly important that we have confidence in the building technologies that we're using in the country, and this is something obviously the government is quite interested in as they support the growth of the MMC sector, that technical standards are maintained. So generally we look to the warranties and assurance market, so BOPAS, Build Off-Site Property Assurance Scheme, NHBC accepts to do those 60-year life assurance assessments, which are 230-year mortgage terms, to say that from a technical standpoint, we believe that those homes are fit for purpose and are going to last the minimum of that period. And then behind that, you've also got common technical standards from Building Research Establishment, BRE, with their catchily titled BPS 7014, technical standard for modular construction. Again, so the standards are out there, and so are the market, warranty providers that sit behind them. So this is the functioning marketplace that we see, and we see to drive innovation and support innovation effectively to maintain those standards.
Just going back to Stephen there on one point there, Stephen, when you talked about performance standards, what do you think are the most critical performance standards?
Edward says, because one of the concerns you've got in the marketplace is there is the prefab tag and there is the concern about the post-war prefabs. I would always argue that they actually did what they were supposed to do. They were only designed with a limited lifespan, and they actually significantly exceeded that. They did far better than they were originally planned to do. They were 10, 20-year buildings, and some of them are still here, and they've been repurposed perfectly adequately. So I think for me, it's that standardized, it's those standards that are really important. I think it's also, there needs to be an understanding that the UK market is a slightly different market to an awful lot of markets overseas, where you've seen much higher levels of uptake. You know, the UK market in terms of traditional house building is dominated by a very small number of players who control the marketplace. What's really interesting to me is the growth in that sort of non-core marketplace, and I think the real growth in the delivery of homes is going to be outside of those mass house builders and the traditional building, which will also automatically increase the uptake of MMC. I do think Joseph's point is absolutely right. We don't want a 1970s timber frame problem that occurred. Now, I think it's before my time, certainly, and I don't know the details of what went on because I was only a small child. But I think there is a concern in the industry. But I'll be honest with you, the supply chain actually share that concern. The good supply chain does not want to deliver bad buildings because the reputation of the industry is hinging on it. So I think those standards, it's really about the fabric, because that's where we're going to deal with the other challenge, which is net zero. Because the building performance criteria, MMC gives good building performance, good fabric performance, good airtightness, ways of achieving levels of insulation and performance of buildings that are going to become an absolute necessity if we're going to deal with the climate change challenge.
Okay, well, I'd like to, if we take the discussion on now and maybe talk about some of the barriers to scalability and growth of MMC in the UK. There was a statistic I read in 2020, only 8% of the homes built in the UK were modular build, but Sweden builds 45% of its new homes off-site, and Japan manages to build 180,000 modular homes a year. So why is the UK lagging so far behind? And touching on one of your points, Stephen, perhaps it would be easy to look at our market and the way that we have a number of large volume house builders that dominate that market. But I think the answer is, a lot more nuanced than that. So some have suggested that the barrier to growth in the UK is the lack of appetite from insurers and lenders to provide the necessary cover that Edward alluded to, and also to finance both the manufacturers and the owners of the MMC built homes. So I'd like to ask the panel, is that a fair suggestion? And what do you think would mitigate the concerns that the financiers may have? And obviously, Joe, you're the best person to start with this one, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So there's a lot to go for there. There's quite a few bits to cover, but I think firstly, just important to note there's a key difference here between the lenders to the owners of MMC homes, so the mortgage lenders, and then the lenders to the builders of MMC homes, so commercial lenders. We do both at Lloyds, and it's probably fair to say there's quite a big difference between the appetite on both of those separate sides. So firstly, mortgage lending and insurance. So the mortgageability of a new home is subject to a range of factors, as we all know. The most important one in terms of this conversation is the warranty on the home, and Edward's mentioned this already. Lenders accept a range of standard warranties, NHBC, BOPAS, etc., all the ones that Edward mentioned. And the fact is, MMC homes have actually met those standards for a number of years now. So in that sense, there's no real difference between an MMC home and a traditionally built house. There are a range of other factors to consider for the mortgageability of a house, but again, all in line with traditional standards, including 60-year design life, geography, resaleability, etc. And again, MMC has had no major issues with meeting those requirements. So in terms of mortgageability, we don't really view lending to the owners of an MMC home as a real barrier to growth. Secondly, the kind of commercial lending side. So commercial lending to MMC is actually in its relative infancy. So there's quite a few different things to consider in terms of commercial lending. So firstly, many of the largest builders of MMC are using group level facilities. So take the clients that I work with day in, day out, so large house builders. There's no real barrier to funding there because the traditional lenders take their comfort in these house builders from the fact that they're leading players in the market. They've got strong management teams, they've got good access to capital, and therefore they pass all the standard credit checks that are required in the industry. And they are big users of MMC across the sector. So there's no major issue there, to be honest. The opposite end of the spectrum is the kind of quasi-startup MMC factory. Many of those are at the opposite end of the spectrum. They'll have a single banking relationship. They'll struggle to meet the kind of conservative credit requirements of the traditional lenders. And that's because lenders kind of need to see that historical performance of sustained delivery against a pipeline. And they also need to price against internal credit ratings. And obviously the internal credit rating of a kind of quasi-startup MMC company will be far different than a kind of traditional listed house builder for obvious reasons. And all of those things I've just mentioned have made it quite difficult to kind of traditionally fund MMC in the last kind of 5 years. I think it's fair to say that the best operators have managed to access institutional investment to effectively cut the lenders out over the last few years and hopefully kind of bypass that initial stage so that they can move to a position where they're more mature and start to meet the creditworthiness requirements of the lenders. But going forward, it's definitely going to be important that lenders get comfortable with the sector, and as I've just mentioned, the kind of evidence of sustained delivery against pipeline is going to be the key bit there. And I think from our experience, we're already seeing that the MMC factories are moving through that kind of relative infancy stage into that more advanced sort of mature phase, and hopefully the lenders can really ramp up their work with them over the next few years. Just to use Lloyds as an example, we really view MMC as a driver for high quality sustainable housing, and we're working with our risk teams and people like Edward who's on the panel just to understand how we can kind of flex our traditional credit requirements and ensure we support the sector, just because it's such a key one for us in terms of housing delivery, sustainability, and all the other things that we know go along with MMC. And actually, let's be frank, if you look purely at the banks in terms of their position in the market, they've got a vested interest to support these companies at a stage now where they might move from a kind of an MMC firm in its relevant infancy into a real player in the market, and look, we want to be the sole bank for these companies. So there's a vested interest there to be close to these companies and help them out in the early stages. So just in summary, there's no major barriers to mortgage lending, so the owners of the MMC home, but still quite a lot of work to be done in terms of commercial lending as the sector matures.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good answer there, Joe. Edward, what kind of challenges do you see with the lending, the financing?
Quite a complicated picture, to be honest. So as in, agree with Joe that mortgage finance is fortunately not so much of an issue looking at those market structures of warranties and accreditations. Development finance is a little more complicated, again, due to the nascency of the manufacturing marketplace. Many of them are young businesses, they're less than 5 or 7 years old, they don't have positive balance sheet positions or cash flow profits. Therefore, development finance providers and large customers look at those manufacturers and go, do I really want to put several hundred homes, a large scheme, a big portion of my development pipeline through that business and take exposure to that? Because if that business goes bust, where do I secure my new housing delivery partner? So that's the challenge in the development finance side. And then on the working capital finance side for the manufacturers, because of the challenges of getting customers, developers to directly procure MMC solutions from manufacturers, they struggle to build the pipeline of order books that they can demonstrate to the commercial lending marketplace to say, let me have a 10-20 million pound loan so that I can invest in manufacturing equipment and technology alongside staff training in order to actually upskill capacity, because these factories need to scale 1,000 homes a year perhaps before you really see those manufacturing synergies where cost comes down, quality is maintained, and we really see the benefits start to perform.
And Stephen, on a linked topic of insurance, what what do you see as some of the issues the insurers have of the end product?
I think the key one there is really around a lack of understanding. There's a belief that MMC is a product, when in reality it's not. It's a process. It's a way of assembling a building using basically essentially the same components that a traditional building is built of, steel, timber. In the case of an awful lot of MMC houses, even external facework as a freestanding brick skin. So the materials and processes, the materials are largely the same. It's a lack of understanding around that, the idea that what's going to happen if we insure this building and we need to repair it, are we going to have to actually go to the manufacturer for them to repair it? And is the manufacturer going to be around? So we have seen this. Mark Farmer's work in 2017 developing the sort of MMC categorization that was also reviewed the question of insurers and to try and provide some more surety about what the systems mean and what the wordings mean, which is why the categorization system was developed. I think insurers are starting to accept that the requirements are not unique. You can modify or repair if needed an MMC building because the materials are the same. So I think it's starting to ease up. I do think there is an exposure problem, and there is probably a desire to limit exposure to large numbers of MMC homes, perhaps in a particular development or a particularly concentrated manufacturer, to pick up Edward's point again about the idea that, if you were the insurer for all the homes delivered by XYZ manufacturer on that particular site, your concentration of risk is suddenly significantly greater. And that, I think, is one of the key questions. Part of this, though, all comes back to that question about the standards and the performance criteria again. And Edward's point about redundancy of supply chain is a concern from clients. If I get into bed with this particular supplier, and it's the same with the insurers, and I think standardization of the sort of spatial arrangements or the performance criteria then means, well, you could actually substitute manufacturer for manufacturer. So does it really matter that it's manufacturer A or manufacturer B? As you would do in a traditional marketplace, you have substitution available for your materials. For component A could be bought from 3 or 4 different supply chain partners, and that's what clients feel happy with. So I think that is starting to ease up as the understanding increases. But I also think we need to change the mindset on materials and start thinking about what materials actually work in a manufacturing environment. So that's something to look to for the future, because that may also ease the insurance concerns about durability, as will the warranty issues.
And Jesse, can I bring you in here and ask for your views on this topic of financing and lending and insurance?
Of course, I think what we're discussing here is interesting because it shows that we're in a process where the market is maturing. It's going through that phase of maturing, and we know that actually, if the demand was high enough, a lot of these problems would be solved anyway, because innovation comes out when there's really high demand. People just make a way, don't they? Because there's a way to make these businesses work. And I think there's an interesting sort of chicken and egg scenario, isn't there, around the sort of supply and demand aspect of this. And I think I think Stephen picked up on it just a moment ago around misunderstanding. And I think particularly when we're talking about MMC, volumetric, 2D, 3D, whichever type of MMC you're talking about, I think there are real kind of misunderstandings about what it is, particularly from I work really closely with local authorities, with regional housing associations and things like that, and there are different views that come out around what is MMC, what it'll do, what it won't do, how it's just a sort of cookie cutter, prefab, etc., which we've already touched on already. And it as well as, even if you can get over the barriers of misconceptions of what MMC is and the benefits or the challenges that it might throw up, actually the practical process of using MMC, I think of kind of councils building homes, actually the practical process is that it's got to change some of the ways that they've been delivering houses for potentially years, and change isn't something that people love to embrace at the drop of a hat at a moment's notice. And so actually those changes of processes, the rethinking through how you're building your legal contracts, the way that financing is spent, at what point in the process, who has control of what asset when, it is a big challenge, actually. Like where we do design freezes in designing and planning, let's not even go into planning, but there are some big hurdles to overcome in terms of just misconceptions. But I think I think the potential with MMC is huge. And I think with MMC, you're actually looking potentially at using a kind of, if your goal is to drive the building of houses, actually MMC is a real opportunity because it's potentially a different model. Whereas traditional house building is, you know, you make profit based on land ownership, planning uplift, etc., potentially land banking, or there's a lot more kind of tied into the process of holding land or even delaying build out or sales, etc. Actually, with MMC, particularly some of the volumetric companies that I've worked with, actually their profit making process, the way their businesses are structured, are on the number of homes they can get through the factory, the number of output of homes that they can actually build. So there's a potential here to really look at, if your goal is to build homes and get homes moving, MMC provides a real opportunity because of that potential shift in business models for some of the manufacturers, and to use the, you know, we're looking at producing a product, which I know, Stephen, you've just kind of said it isn't a product, it's a process, but it's a different way of building homes, which is potentially shifting the way that finance is moving, and therefore the way that products are coming out at the other end, or products are ending up on a field, you know, and homes are actually being lived in. Yeah, so I think there's some real opportunities in there, as well as some major barriers that we need to help the supply chain mature through.
And I think you used a key word there in change, and a change of mindset that everyone needs to adopt. And linked into that, of course, is the mindset of the consumer. You know, you made the point, Stephen, and you made it as well, Jesse, that people still have misconceptions about what modular construction can be, and so, you know, we need to change that mindset and realize that actually perhaps this is more of a desirable product. And if I go back to Stephen on that, to follow up from Jesse, if that's okay.
Yes, I just wanted to pick up on one of Jesse's points about the shift in market. I think there is also an interesting question that's coming up at the moment. I mean, you've just identified one of the key issues about the mass house builders, Jesse. Speed of delivery is actually not important to them. And that's one of the key drivers about MMC. If you've got an MMC factory, if it's empty, that's a nightmare, because the overhead is there. It's costing you X £1,000s a day to have the factory stood there doing nothing. So they're absolutely, it's about productivity, it's about continually building, and that brings your unit costs down, that makes your business more efficient. So speed of delivery is not an issue for the traditional builders. They really don't want speed of delivery in actual fact. They don't want lots of houses. That puts lots in the supply chain. The demand drops, prices are hit, land values drop. The whole thing doesn't work for them. What I think is interesting, and there's a dynamic in the marketplace at the moment, there is a shift to build to rent, there is a shift to social rent, and there is a shift to renting as a total format. One of my colleagues at F&G attended a conference not so long ago, and a comment was made that of children born today, 50% of them will only ever live in rented property. Now, that is a huge shift, and that's a major opportunity for the MMC marketplace, I think, Ian, because the speed of delivery then does matter. The value of delivery, the value of revenue, standardization, the value of recovery on that investment in the actual building itself, not necessarily the land, starts to shift the whole dynamic. And I think that's something that's going to be a really interesting scenario over the next 10 to 20 years, and would allow MMC a foothold in this space, because the natural benefit of speed actually becomes valuable when at the moment it isn't. And I think for me, that's why it's an interesting point, that just to pick up what Jesse said about this idea of the shift in the emphasis, and that's one that I see coming. Thank you anyway for letting me drop in there, Ian.
I'm going to take the discussion onto another point. So of course, moving to MMC isn't just all about increasing the speed of construction, as we talked about there, Steve, and nor is it about reducing the labour requirements needed to meet the UK's house building targets. You have to also look at the work to be done in reskilling the existing workforces to ease pressures and bring the brand new skills to the sector that will be required. But linked into, of course, of all of that is it's about trying to improve the equality, diversity and inclusion within the workforce. And I was quite surprised to see a recent UK government report show that just 13% of the current construction workforce are female, and that's in comparison to 20% across energy, mining, and transport. And of course, linked into that, and we've already touched upon some of the other points, was that we've got to do a lot better in terms of improving our carbon footprint. So we often hear about businesses working to develop their environmental, social, and governance, or their ESG focus, but I think sometimes that can be perceived to be an afterthought rather than a driving strategy. So I'd be interested in the panel's view as to whether MMC can bring real change from a ESG and sustainability perspective. And can I start that discussion with you, Stephen, please?
Sure, thank you, Ian. I think there's a couple of interesting notes there. One is about the diversity situation. Construction sites are not particularly easy places to work in some environments. They tend to be peripatetic employment. It tends to be located, you could be in London one week, you could be in Cornwall the next, and Scotland the week after that, if you're a skilled tradesperson providing a skilled process on site. That's not necessarily a very inclusive process. It certainly is not conducive for people who have other responsibilities, such as caring, perhaps for children, they're bringing children up, or with responsibilities for perhaps elderly parents. So I think there's a situation where there is a major opportunity to shift the paradigm around ED&I particularly, because factory workplaces are much more inclusive. They're a regular location to work. You can work shifts, you can work working patterns that are much more flexible. It's better for people with disabilities. There are fewer impediments to in a factory environment. The floor is level. It's a regular place of work. Things always happen in the same way, in the same processes. You don't suddenly get a trench opening up in front of the shop floor in a morning because someone needed to put a service in. So for people with challenging conditions for whom that kind of very variable and dynamic workplace is a challenge, working in a factory environment is significantly easier. And I'm aware of, you mentioned that, was it 13%, I think you said, of females? I've been in a number of MMC factories and seeing significantly higher levels of women working on the shop floor, right across from trade skills through supervisory roles. One of the major off-site house builders that I visited recently, their figures on their shop floor are actually in excess of that, never mind across their whole business, because they're seeing a shift. The other thing you're seeing is a move towards digital as well, because there is a situation with employment here that youngsters are more interested in things that require looking at digital skills and that kind of digital environment. And the use of MMC naturally drives a more digital approach, because you have to break the building down into more components and you have to design it to a higher level of detail. You can't just give a drawing to somebody and say, go and make that for me. You have to build it and break it down into more components. So you see some significant benefits there. The other hidden one, which for me is a really interesting one, is around the actual benefit of a factory process on the embodied carbon in a building. Because the process of delivering a building in a factory process is significantly fewer transports, significantly less waste, significantly less personnel movements. So, the fact is that most people will live within 10 or 15 kilometers perhaps of the factory facility if they're going to work there every day. People actually would move to live near their work, don't they, quite often? That's probably significantly lower carbon footprint. There is some data. Data's a little difficult, but some of the data suggests that up to 70% fewer transport movements overall for an off-site approach, and the carbon footprint of that is obviously quite significant. So I think for me, there's the ED&I side, and the safety is the other one from an ESG perspective. The do no harm philosophy. It's a much safer place to work. Factories are traditionally about 10 times safer than traditional on-site construction in terms of the statistics from the Health and Safety Executive. So I think there's a variety of areas where the ESG value, and as that becomes more important, and I think somebody mentioned, I think it was Joe mentioned that there've been some institutional investors looking at this particular space. I'm aware that at least one of those, their ESG requirements is a significant part of their investment logic and their investment reasoning in this space, because they actually see it as adding significantly to their ESG situation.
Thanks, Stephen. Pablo, what's your view, please, on MMC and how it can improve and support and move towards a more sustainable future?
Well, it's been proven. I think there's been lots of studies being done for the past years that prove that MMC in general is more sustainable practice than traditional construction overall, and it's been proven all across the world in different processes and different methods with different labor costs. In general, it's just better in that sense. And to add up to what Stephen pointed, in terms of ESG, it's not just that it's easier, and it requires less workforce in general. The ergonomics of the workplace are generally much better because you can adapt the workplace to the worker, which is something that you cannot do on site. And in general, obviously on the ADI side, I subscribe every single point that, especially because when you take an MMC construction methods, you just don't need to be on site as longer, and as is required in other places. So in general, it is better for inclusivity and diversity too. On the sustainability part, there's several points that maybe Stephen has not mentioned yet. One of them is on the material side. There's been a lot of effort in terms of innovation for change of materials into a more sustainable practice, especially we see a lot of growth right now on mass timber and the change of trying to avoid non-renewable construction materials such as concrete, for example, and try to reduce the use of concrete for other timber materials such as cross-laminated timber, for example, which is very keen on these days in North America, for example. On the other side, you always have the transportation for sure, which is one of the biggest carbon footprint problems with construction, is that you have to transport so many things to a specific location in different days. And 70%, it gives you so much range of value that we even saw a study once of a house that was built in China by a manufacturer in China using MMC, and it was delivered to New Zealand across, you can imagine, the Pacific Ocean, which is a lot of kilometers to cover. And it was still more sustainable than actually bringing all the materials at once to New Zealand and traditionally built in New Zealand. So there's a lot. I mean, that's an extreme case, and everybody will agree on that. But there's a lot of range to cover that construction needs to improve in terms of sustainability, and MMC actually does wonders for that. In terms of that, also, there's a big point in relation to robotics and the introduction of automation and robotics in factories these days in MMC. MMC, one of the big ones is that once you have a factory in place and it's not going to go anywhere, you can start investing into your processes, you can start investing into automation to improve your productivity and obviously the betterment of your process in general. And obviously that's not the case for everybody. Sometimes the production needs are not exactly for everybody, but the role of robotics actually helps you to actually get there to attack that problem that the construction industry has these days in regards of the labor force. And just if you ask a recent graduate of electrical engineering these days that specializes in robotics, and you say, well, what do you want to do? Construction industry is not necessarily the answer that you're going to get. And that's something that the construction industry has to work forward and has to be more excited for all these graduates that need to be out there to match the needs of the industry at some point. And those new technologies and all the digital technologies have to be there to actually attract that talent and those new engineers and new workforce that is required for the industry to maintain their level of production, which is something that maybe we haven't mentioned yet, but it's really important. It's going to be a huge challenge in the next years for the industry.
Thank you. Can I bring you in that part as well, Jesse, and ask your opinions on ESG and MMC?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a real opportunity here, and I think this is where the fact that we're in a maturing market, we're in the process of this supply chain and this market maturing, is a real benefit, because I think as it's developing and as it's maturing, there's a real opportunity almost for the MMC world to be known for being more sustainable, to being more carbon friendly, to being more environmentally friendly, biodiverse friendly, X, Y, Z, all those different things. And I think as the market is being driven, there is an opportunity to build these in. But again, it comes back to this sort of supply and demand conversation. So, for example, from a sort of local government perspective, there is the Social Value Act that can be drawn upon in terms of when you're looking at procuring things from a government perspective, looking at best value, not necessarily best cost, but best value. So you can start to, particularly there are tools out there now that actually starts looking at how do you measure the benefit to societies, to climate, to the ecology, and that kind of thing, and actually beginning to be able to measure those in a monetary way, so you can compare it against cost versus value. But they're not the same. And actually, if we keep measuring things based on sort of capex, your first cost, your amount of money that you've got to put down at one point, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. But if we can change the way that we value things and start to look longer term, start to look at the life cycle of these buildings, start to look at the costs to retrofit and adding those to the sort of the pricing as we're looking at this, then there could be a real opportunity. But I do think we've got to keep educating people, and the conversation needs to be continued, because I think this only really works if people are aware of the benefits and the possibilities, but also the cost for not making these changes, for not investing in these things, and how actually if we don't, what's the risk of staying where we are and not making any changes, and those risks are greater, but change is a big hurdle to overcome. So how can we keep educating people to look at what could we do differently? How can we move this forward? And I think in the midst of that, MMC is a real gift, because there are lots of MMC companies that are really keen to get orders, to get pipelines on their books and that kind of thing, and so are willing to put in extra features to their design, to think more strategically about their ecological offering, to think more about their kind of carbon offerings and their sustainability offerings, to make sure that they're a more attractive offering. So there's this sort of emerging market, as it were, is a real opportunity, I think, for MMC to be known for this, but we've got to drive that from a demand side so that the supply maintains that and doesn't just become a quicker way to build smaller boxes.
Yeah, and I wholeheartedly agree with all of that, Jessie, and sure all of us can see the benefits on this panel. But what about suggestions that come from some people, some of the skeptics to modular construction, that say, oh, MMC, it's only about cutting costs. It's all about cutting costs for building social housing, where the aesthetic and the comfort of a property is secondary to the low cost. So volume over quality. What would you say to that?
I think that is one of the narratives, but I think it falls down really quickly, because actually at the moment MMC, although it could be cheaper, isn't cheaper, and it requires a lot more effort from those that are actually building it out. So from all sorts of different perspectives, because of this kind of rethinking the process. So it isn't just a cheaper way to build lower quality homes. But I also think the fact that that narrative exists is just an indicator of how much more work needs to be done on the education side. And we're really good about talking about it within the sector, and that is increasing, and more people are aware of what MMC housing is, the kind of the breadth of the offering. But how do we get that message out to those that are procuring it from a space where they can really drive those values? So for example, local authorities, how do we help them engage with the MMC sector and engage with the market more, such that that is starting to drive more of that kind of demand, and that demand for values such as sustainability, such as equalities and diversity, such as XYZ, all the things that we've touched on before. So there really is an education piece that needs to keep going. We need to not kind of take our foot off the pedal on that side of things, I think.
Edward, I'm not sure. Did you catch what Jessie was saying there, or did we lose you?
Sorry, I did have a few Wi-Fi issues there, but I got a lot of the conversation. Yes.
I'd be interested in your view on that as well, from a Homes England perspective, and the silencing the skeptics who say this is just building high volume, low quality.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I completely disagree with that notion. Effectively, you've got to look at the quality of the construction that we currently deliver in this country, and it's pretty shocking in terms of energy performance. 1%, less than 1% of energy efficient homes are EPC-A, more than 7% are D and lower, and that's new build homes. So as we move towards net zero, we are delivering low quality homes that are not fit for purpose now, let alone for a low carbon economy in the future. This is borne out also in the housing quality stats that we see as well. And what we're trying to do is bring a manufacturing and industrialization approach to construction so that those processes bring quality to the housing marketplace in a way that is possible through traditional construction and through traditional skills, but it's heavily reliant on the quality of that labour and the level of skills within that labour workforce. And as the government seeks to deliver more homes to meet the housing need, we need to train more people or bring more people into this industry. And as this industry has not changed significantly in the way it works for several hundred years, it's understandably getting harder and harder to attract younger people to an industry that is way behind on digital transformation versus the rest of the economy.
And Stephen, I could see you nodding furiously when Edward was talking there about the quality of existing builds. So I'll bring you in on that point as well.
Well, the reason it amuses me is because I've had the discussion with people before about, what happens if there's a defect in a property or a defect in an MMC property, because it'll be endemic, it'll be through all of them. I mean, the first response is the chances of there being a defect in the first place are significantly lower because of everything that everyone's already talked about. BOPAS assurance, the fact that you can go and check every single one of these in the same location. It was built in a nice dry place where water wasn't pouring through the roof. And my other response to it, the reason I was chuckling, it's not like traditional construction's doing a great job right now, is it? The benchmark is actually, we're not actually delivering particularly good quality. You only have to see some of the problems that some of the major house builders have had with their reputational issues around quality and the fact that they've got major concerns across some of those things. I think just to touch back on one of Jesse's other points is why would this be cheaper? Because it isn't cheaper. You're using the same materials, you're delivering the same components and elements, you're building them in a slightly different way, in a more efficient way, to be sure, but you've also got the cost of the infrastructure and the factory and in the investment and the repayment on investment. So my general view on this is it's not cheaper, it's cost neutral. If it's done properly and done efficiently by using the right people and the right design teams and not having redundant costs in the process, it's cost neutral. What you get then for free is the benefits around things like quality, speed of delivery, lack of disruption, improved predictability around delivery on cost, quality and time. So those are the sort of hidden and the sustainability and health and safety benefits. So I think for me, the quality benchmark is actually currently not great, and the quality of offsite construction is significantly more predictable. One of the big things that people don't understand about offsite and MMC is predictability, because it's a repetitious process taking place in the same place every time and being done in a regular manner. It's highly repetitious, and therefore the quality and the certainty of both time, quality and cost is significantly higher. And predictability for me is a big missed opportunity for the industry to sell itself, because a lot of construction is not predictable.
Can I just jump in there just to
Yes, please.
to kind of make the point that if we were having this discussion 5 years ago, which I think we all were, we'd be making the exact same points. I think look how far we've come in that 5 year period. We're all making the same points now, but I think there's more understanding in the sector that MMC is going to be a driver for all of the things that we've discussed and all of the points we've just made. So there's a massive opportunity there, as Jesse was saying, to really grasp that now as we move into that next phase.
I think there's also an opportunity for MMC to deliver other things. But for example, customization, mass customization, or the opportunity to customize things in a more easy manner. If you look at some of the providers in the space, they offer the buyers and the users the opportunities to actually tailor their house to suit their needs. And that's more achievable in an MMC typology where you've got invisible standardization. The stuff you can't see is standardized. The stuff you can see is customized. And there's one or two providers out there offering some really interesting and innovative processes, a bit like customizing your car before you order it. You've got 55,000 options you can choose, or combinations of options on a car. Well, perhaps by looking at some of the work that's being done elsewhere, and that production process allows that kind of customization. So I think there's some interesting developments coming up which will allow more of the benefits of MMC to be actually, delivered to users and people who are actually the end users and really improving the outcomes.
Okay, I'm going to start bringing things to a close, but we've had quite a few questions in. If we can just take one or two before people dash off. Edward, we've got one in here, which is asking how can we make securing the approvals, the BOPAS and the NHB accepts easier, faster? Current concern is that the approvals don't always have the understanding of the particular MMC system, and they always want to revert back to traditional build. Do you have a view on that?
Yes, I mean, that is part of the education challenge that we've been talking about today, is the fact that even the construction technical marketplace doesn't necessarily have the depth of knowledge and skills where it's needed. So this is something that we need to work on, and this is all about the pace that government is pushing MMC at. So we set a 25% target within the affordable housing programme. Why not 50? Why not 100%? It's all about moving at a speed where we believe the market can deliver, and we can keep an eye on the quality and make sure that we're not moving too fast, but that the industry can't necessarily keep up. Clearly, those BOPAS and NHBC technical warranty providers understand the marketplace and the products, so they are well placed to support the industry. But obviously, the wider marketplace of construction professionals may not necessarily have a familiarity with the full spectrum of MMC technologies that do exist.
Pablo, do you have an opinion on that as well?
It's all about education. At the end, this thing has been happening for quite a few years already, and somehow we are not reaching all the people that we should be reaching. And obviously, there's going to be always some kind of pushback for change that always happen with innovation in any kind of sector. It doesn't mean that it's the construction industry that is risk averse or that it is more difficult than others. I don't think that's true, and the fact that we're here shows that. But for some reason, there's always this difficulty to accept that what's been working for many years has to change somehow, and the changes themselves are not just a little bit. They're very drastic changes that the industry really needed. So in the end, we do have to make a lot more efforts into getting to all of those people that still don't understand or don't have the correct side of what MMC can provide. And even from the university ourselves, we should be doing a better job maybe to showing or being more transparent with the innovation that MMC can get into the industry. And yeah, definitely in the end, I think it all falls back to that, is that we really need to reach more and more people as soon as possible.
I'm conscious of time. There are more questions. There's quite a few questions which I would like to ask, but I don't think we'll have time for it. Conscious it's nearly 11 o'clock and people have other calls to get to. So we'll stop here. We'll bring things to a close, and I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank all of our panel members for a really informative and engaging session. And thank you to everyone that's listened as well and taken time out of their day to join us and help us all develop this new part of the industry. Just a quick reminder that the session's been recorded, and you'll receive a link for that, which you can share with your colleagues. And with that, I will leave you to enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.